Today I will be telling you about how disability support started at Turkish universities. In 25 years of experience at the Middle East Technical University, which I've just retired from, I have worked with disabled students to look at how experience and knowledge can be transferred into Turkey. This happened at a time where there was virtually no infrastructure or expertise. There was a lot of trial and error, and we hope now that what we have developed will allow further transfer into other countries and cultures. In this presentation, I will start by talking about where students were in 2000, my journey, successes, processes, and finish with a model for change. In 2000, there was very low expectation, limiting attitudes. Teachers were not empowered, and so they didn't empower. The Ministry of Education had established special schools in the early 1960s, which meant that education was free for disabled children, and those from rural backgrounds ended up coming and got education, which their non-disabled siblings didn't get. In 1986, the Higher Education Council introduced the first accommodation for visually impaired students at the university entrance exam, 1 hour plus 30 minutes, which became 2 hours plus 30 minutes, 3 hours plus 30 minutes. The accommodation was not well anchored. The internet was coming in 2000. The few people who could afford the technology and had enough English brought the technology in, and then eventually it was adapted to Turkish, and there was a massive interest from visually impaired people because until then they had little access to printed material. Brailing was limited, and so they became very strong at computing. Now, there were some students at universities, though there was no system. There was a lot of individual effort. There were disabled people's organizations, but little focus on education. People were keen to get involved, but because they hadn't had enough opportunities to develop experience and understanding, it meant that they didn't have skills that they needed to be able to make reasonable requests or plan. Precedents were needed. The first pioneers were not representative, but that fairly quickly developed. Now, my journey, I came at the end of 1993 when I moved to Turkey. I had 2 years at a language school where my first ever blind student took me to the School for the Blind, where he wanted to get a book printed. He couldn't get the book printed, but I met the students. So when in 1996, I transferred to Middle East Technical University as an English language teacher, I was wondering already how such children could actually access education at the university I just started at. I rapidly met one of the blind students who was involved in the Friendship and Solidarity Society. And so for many years, I just used to go and sit with them, listen to where they were, what they were trying to do, their frustrations. And it was in 1998 that with one of those students, we decided to use an English language conference to give a presentation to just regular teachers about what would happen if you had a student with special need in your class. 70 people attended. It was an amazing event. I'm not sure actually how much was anchored, but it seeded things. 3 years later, at another conference, this time an international conference, I presented something that was far more prepared. It was a proposal for how disability support systems could be established at Turkish universities. By 2003, the number of visually impaired students had dropped significantly. There were only 3 currently studying at this technical university. We transformed the student society into Metu Without Barriers so that it was looking at inclusion. It was right across the board, whatever the disabilities. We were raising awareness. Then 2004, I'd worked with colleagues and identified over 100 disabled students at 6 of the universities in Ankara. I was kind of disappointed when only 40 of them attended a one-day event, but 40% isn't bad. July, I took a group to Egypt. Why? There was the opportunity. August, I hopped on a bus and went to Iran to see what I could find. And that is where I came across Mehtap. Mehtap is deaf-blind. She'd finished her master's and was on her way to Italy, where she was going to do her PhD. And her example meant that I could come back to the Turkish institutions and say, this is what's happening in Iran. If that's happening in Iran, we can do it too in Turkey, they said. Now, November of that year, the British Council sent me on a study visit. I had 8 incredible days, 9 universities, 5 NGOs. I met future NADP members and especially Elizabeth Standen. And Elizabeth Standen, who was then at Bristol University, gave me one piece of paper and said, if you only take this piece of paper, take the models of disability to Turkey. It's now been translated into 4 or 5 other languages. And she mentored me until she passed away last year. She was amazing. Now, 2004, the World Disability Day, that was when the report of my British Council visit was presented to the rector of our university, who then appointed me as the disability coordinator. We didn't know quite what to call it because it was the first ever in Turkey. And this was 8 months before the Turkish Disability Act was passed. And this included a clause on equal opportunities in higher education, which I happen to have asked for. As a result of this, the Higher Education Council had to produce a directive on disability. I was involved in that. 2007, there was EU funding. It was only a 6-day project. I took 4 colleagues. We went to Bristol University and UWE. Then in 2008 and 9, we had a much longer project, which involved many countries. And I made sure another university was involved in the organization of that. 2012, it was decided that I should go back to English language teaching. So I focused on inclusion in English language learning and teaching. 2019, I was given an award by the Higher Education Council for my work on inclusion, and last year I retired. Now, of the long-lasting achievements, the key one really was the outcome of those short 6 days in Bristol. I had to do a dissemination activity, and so I cheekily called it the first Turkish annual workshop on disability and university. At that meeting, I thought that perhaps nobody would come, or other than the speakers, or perhaps a few. We had 28 people from a quarter of all Turkish universities. I got feedback which said that people wanted to stay in touch, hence the Turkish platform on disability and university. That was modeled on the DisForum model. And people started connecting, and by the beginning of 2008, people were saying, well, when's the next one? And so I found someone to help me organize the second, and you can see they carried on until COVID. one group which has really had a great impact because of the way it's so well organized is the Izmir local group. They connect very well, and they plan well, and they achieve things. So when last year on the NADP list, the Mike Oliver documentary was shared, they volunteered to have it transformed into an accessible Turkish form. It now, this is not only with subtitles and overvoicing, but has Turkish Sign Language. And they've also recently developed a booklet for inclusive support during these COVID times. And the student society is still carrying on its adapted activities online, which means that students of ours who are abroad or people who are not our students can join in. One group that I specifically want to mention is, it's just quite unique the way it's been working. The Turkish Association for Visually Impaired in Education is so transparent. It works on needs, and their demands have actually, even before they formed an association, they were putting pressure on institutions and ministries who essentially then started working with them and getting them involved in the consultation process. They're doing a lot online, they're empowering activists, and they're monitoring systems. The international cooperation. I was appointed at the end of 2004. The first Innsbruck conference that I could participate in was 2007. I presented a small poster. 2010, I went back. I actually gave a session. There were more Turkish colleagues with me. And it was one of the most crowded national groups. The last session, 2013, was going to be my last, but it turned out to also be the last of the Innsbruck sessions. Innsbruck is important to me because that's where I met Alan Hurst, who invited me to join NADP. EU-funded projects. We have had a lot of developments that we've been able to achieve through this. I've mentioned two already, the short one in Bristol and the longer one later on. And then in 2008, the Student Society organized, let's see, I have to get this down. They organized this 10-day meeting, 9 countries, with an incredible range of impairments involved. And a lot of people were just ready to join in with what was possible. Wojtek is, he's just finished his PhD in Poland. Aurora is from Romania, and she is now a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh. Zeliha runs a successful association in the south of Turkey. Mobility International USA has been organizing very, very strong projects over the years. And in 2005, 2010, 2019, I recommended people to participate. Zeliha was the person who went in 2010. NADP, what can I say? When I first heard of the NADP, I thought it's a national association, so the NADP won't be relevant to me because I'm not even in Europe, I'm outside Europe. However, what the NADP has been able to give me is through this participation, this distance participation, I've been able to pick up passively on many, many aspects that just by being a passive observer of what is relevant, what is challenging people in Britain. So that aspect is one. Another aspect is when I did need guidance, I learned how to ask for very specific things. And one example that I'll give is getting the Times New Roman double justified printing of my department, which was giving to 3,000 people and more a year, that was very, very rapidly sorted out, thanks to NADP. Now, the Manchester conference, yes, because I live so far away, I haven't been able to attend the conferences, but Manchester was a little bit special because I spent so much time in Manchester. And this was where I met up again with Pauline. Pauline, you had been one of the most helpful people when I came for the British Council study tour. And later on, you actually came to Turkey and gave a presentation at Bosphorus University. Nina, I met you at one of the Innsbruck conferences, and when we all three met in Manchester, we came up with the idea of setting up an international network of disabled university students. It didn't actually take off, but the idea is there, and you never know when it might take off. And graduates, yes, we do have some of our disabled graduates who are now lecturing abroad. Okan, who is the person in the middle, he is the only profoundly deaf Turkish person to have studied beyond a bachelor's degree. He got his PhD at the University of Hamburg, and he is now a head of department at a university in Germany. Deniz Aydemir Döke, she's now in university, Penn State University in the States, where I believe she's the only visually impaired member of staff. Now, the process, it's so important to go step by step. If you go too quickly, what happens is when things don't work out, you don't know why they didn't work out. So over time, we had to learn how to move forwards. And very often that meant challenging assumptions that the direct way was the best. Often it's not. Which resources are best used and where? And essentially, how do you get around the barriers? Now, I've written 3 principles: work with allies, focus on specific and feasible steps, and use resources effectively. By far the most important is work with allies. Allies are people who are internally motivated. They want to work with you. They will bring you energy. So choose who you ask for help. Any other people, if they want, they can follow later. Essentially, ask for what people can give. If you start to ask for that little bit more, you'll get a no. If you ask for something really small, it's easier to say yes than say no. Having low expectations is really important because that shields you from disappointment when something doesn't work. Resources. It is so important to understand that resources are not just money. Time, people, energy, awareness, patience, focus, positivity, and many more. By giving clear messages. Here, right, at the beginning, I didn't give clear message because I was still learning how to explain things and what might work. So essentially, the absolute key moment is that moment that you first connect. If you don't connect well, trust is much harder to develop. It's important to understand that people can be fearful of failure. They can be fearful of offending other people. Empty promises are disastrous because they break trust. Now, things are going too fast here. So it's important that people realize they need to change their habits. They need to go from what had been strategies and reflexes that they developed earlier in life, need to be much more conscious so that they're effective. People can practice something before actually jumping in, and then you realize that change is possible. Now, how to bring about change? Here I have a bell chart of awareness. So on the left, you've got low awareness. On the right, you've got higher awareness, with the bulge in the middle of the mass. And my mistake at the beginning was to go to the guy at the top and assuming that he would be able to pass on the message that, yes, there was this new legislation and the university had responsibilities. His response was, the law is wrong, it cannot affect me, and it does not relate. So I went back, licked my wounds, and worked out how I could break this down. This is just a diagram. The figures are approximate. You've got the mass in the middle who will do something if they're told that they have to. You've got some that will resist, some that will follow. You've got some that will absolutely refuse. And then you've got very few who will initiate. Now, what then happens is as awareness changes, it's going to gradually progress to the right. And this is where you will end up with far more people being able to initiate something, a greater number even following, fewer resisting, and the mass in the middle, more of them will just be getting on with changing their habits. Now, here I'd like to thank absolutely everybody who's helped me over this quarter of a century. I will now move on and allow people to ask questions. Anyone who'd like to contact, please do. Thank you very much.